bit late here today, got caught up in some other paperwork. So thank you all for joining us for the Back to the Future exercise. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a couple of notes for you. The REU that was submitted by the Carey Institute in Kawasi was not funded. It ranked highly. I had one very good / excellent and one good rating. There were some concerns about the development of the cohorts and about the role that the Carey Institute is playing. So I think that they're going to think about what they will do going forward. The other thing to mention is that we have decided that we will try to have an all-hands meeting face-to-face in late summer or early fall. It will be at the University of Delaware, hosted by the Coastal Thematic Cluster. More details to come, but you'll be seeing probably a when to meet or a doodle poll or something like that. So expect that. Also, there are a couple of thematic cluster meetings that you are invited to participate in. One is the Drylands and one is the Dust Squared. And so there's information on that at the top of the Google Doc where we keep our meeting notes. And so any questions before we get started? So Julia, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome everybody. And thanks for indulging us in this sort of unusual meeting. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. So the one reason why we do this is that we can show a really 80s themed beginning slide with Back to the Future. But before we get started on this, what we often do in our meetings at the Big Data Cluster is a quick check-in in the chat. So how are you doing? Submit a word or three into the chat, how things are going. I know this is a holiday, so a lot of us are also juggling all kinds of additional things. So thanks to everybody who's showing up here despite the fact it's a holiday. And yeah, just take a moment, submit a word in the chat, and also take a peek how the room is doing today. And while you do this, I'm just gonna give you a little bit of an overview of this meeting. What sort of the goals are for this, and then I'll walk you through what we're going to do. So the goal for this meeting is really to generate a bold vision for how we want critical zone science and education to look like in the future. Let's just assume we have a lot more dollars. What do we envision this to look like? And I don't know how it is for you, but when I try to kind of be bold and generate a vision and be kind of a little bit out there, part of my mind goes directly into censoring myself and puts like all sorts of limits on like, well, that's not possible because this is maybe 100 years from now. So to avoid this, to help us all avoiding directly putting some kind of restrictions, but really thinking about the vision, what would be ideal, we're using this meeting protocol, which is sort of playful in a way. We're gonna have several breakout sessions. That's always gonna be the same group, between 4 and 5 participants, and we're always going to come back and have a quick share out. I have wonderful co-facilitators that are going to facilitate the share out. And our first breakout session is going to be a little bit longer because we'd like to introduce yourselves first. And then in this first breakout session, let's assume it is the future. Whatever that is, it could be 2030 because that's just it's not that far away, actually. It could be 2040, whatever feels like, okay, that's a time in the future. We are there in the future, and we're going to discuss what we most enjoy about critical zone science and education. And so when we're discussing this, we use present tense. And we should be bold and not take ourselves too serious in that. So really talk about like how amazing it is that finally in this present, new present, we have all of these things that we always wanted. The second breakout session is a little shorter, but there we are in the future, and we're looking back at how critical zone science and education used to be, all the problems in 2022. So in that case, we would use past tense, and we get to complain a little bit about what is not working right now. And in the third session, we make the connections between this amazing future that we are already and the past, and we're identifying the pieces that were necessary to bring us to this wonderful place where we are right now, right? So I will always remind you of what the task is for these specific breakout sessions and what kind of past or future tense we're going to use. In whichever group you are, you will need a note. You will need a note. Oh, I kind of have a feedback right now. Okay. I was just thinking if somebody needs to interrupt me, you need to be very vocal because I just tend to go on. So you will need a note taker. We will capture main ideas on Jamboard, and you also will need a spokesperson that might report back from the group. Depending on how many groups we will have, we probably will not hear from everybody all the time, but it's always a good idea to have a note taker. So this is how Jamboard looks like, and this is where we're going to record our notes, and Maddie will in a moment share a link in Jamboard so that you can just access this, and you can navigate here the slides. The first one, session 1, that's the first breakout group. That's where we get to rave about how amazing 2030 is with critical zone science and education. And you can use sticky notes here. They look a little bit like this here. You can just put sticky notes, capture just, it's kind of really not a lot of text fits on there. So that's helpful to not interrupt the discussion. Put some notes there. You can rearrange notes. You can also put text. You can put with the marker here, make connections between notes. So this is fairly intuitive, but let us know if you have any problems with that. Okay, so that's the main thing. That's what we're doing today. So just as a reminder, this first session, it's the future. So quickly introduce yourselves with pronouns, select a note taker and a spokesperson. Discuss what you love most about how critical zone science and education is now in 2030. Use present tense, and it works best if you actually envision this really. So how does it look like? What do you hear? And take notes. And the last slide, just something that we use a lot in our meetings also is discussion norms. So in breakout groups, it's actually really hard not to be present because you're like only 4 to 5 people. But one thing, step up or step back. So that is just keeping an eye out how the room functions. So if you tend to be more quiet in these types of discussions, maybe step up. If you tend to dominate discussions, maybe give others a little bit of room. We have permission to be raggedy. So half-formed thoughts are really welcome. And depending on what we're discussing in these rooms, also assume good intentions, but please also attend to impacts. So I'm going to stop the share and just gonna real quick check in if anybody has questions on the procedure of our bold visions for the future of critical zone science and education. Okay, So in that case, Maddie, I think you can send us into breakout rooms. We'll have about 7 minutes, and then you'll get a reminder before the time's up. Yeah, have fun envisioning how critical zone science will work.
One question for you, Julia. We are blessed with many participants. So I think if we have 3 groups, that's like 7 to 8 people per group. So if we would rather do 4 groups of smaller, we'll just need to keep that in mind when we start sharing out.
Yeah, I think it's best to have not more than 4 to 5 participants in the group to make the discussions easier. And yeah, feel like it's not a huge issue if we don't hear from everybody during share out.
I'll go ahead and start those up then.
Maddie, I wonder if it would be making sense to pause the recording for these 7 minutes, because I think people that are looking.
Hi, everyone. My name's Dustin, if I didn't already meet you. I'm a postdoc at the University of Vermont working with Julia, he, him. So hopefully you enjoyed your time in 2030. I know in my group we had lots of exciting ideas, including elementary students being able to walk around in a virtual reality world exploring the bedrock dynamics is pretty awesome. So hopefully year 2030 was as exciting as ours. I'm curious if anybody else has some things they would like to share out to the other groups.
Sure, I can chime in. I'm Erin Siebold. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a scientist at the Kansas Geological Survey at the University of Kansas, and I also work with the Big Data Cluster. And one thing that our group really liked about the year 2030 is how established the term critical zone science has become, such that, you know, lots of different people from other scientists to educators and policymakers have a good sense of what that means and what that entails. And so we're able to more effectively communicate our science. And we also really like that it's become a full, because it's more established, it's become a full program at NSF. So it can fund more kinds of projects, both the clusters, but also smaller individual scale projects. So we really like that it's CZ science has fully mainstreamed.
I think that was pretty well aligned with what came out in our discussions, in that it was, you know, a clear understanding in the community of what critical zone science does and what it brings to society, what the benefits are of.
One of the very last things that came up in our group was expanding beyond just the natural sciences, you know, which the CZ already does quite well, but thinking about integrating the values and implication of this scientific knowledge in education and research design and those kinds of aspects.
And we also had a really seamless integration of these multiple types of data into a form that people could actually use. That was already working.
All right, so if people are happy with 2030, and that sounds amazing, how wonderful, right? I was thinking also that we have an automatic data cleanser, right? We're just collecting data, it's being cleansed automatically. We're gonna go into the next session, and I'm just gonna show how that'll look like. So we're still in the future, but we're thinking back to 2022 and like describing how things used to be back then. We can include the positives, but definitely also the challenges. And here it's helpful to be as specific as we possibly can be on things such as culture, communication, or organizational structures, resources. So in that case, we would use past tense, present tense. No, sorry, we would use past tense. I apologize, and take notes for on Jamboard again. We'll get you another reminder when time's coming up, and Maddie's gonna open the breakout rooms again. So we'll get to think back how bad things used to be. All right, I think we're all back, or most of us, and Shonda is going to lead the debrief from the second breakout group.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. We just really went through some things with how things were in regards to 2020 and how they look now. When someone made the comment that in 2020, excuse me, my daughter just walked in for a moment. 1 second, sweetie. She's out for President's Day. So they were talking about, the comment was made that in 2020, for people to have a better understanding or definition of what critical zone science actually is. And then that people had the misconception that you had to have a master's degree or a PhD to actually work in critical zone science. And I piggybacked on that, saying, or they think that you have to be a professor of science to work with critical zone science, because I'm in the College of Education. I'm not a professor in science. Although I've taught science in K-12, I don't teach science in higher ed. So those were two myths that were basically debunked. So that's pretty much what we discussed in our session.
Other kind of findings in session 2 from other groups.
One theme that came up in our breakout room with respect to collaboration was that in 2022, it was still hard to figure out how to collaborate across clusters within the CZ program, that there was, so much effort that went into just inter-cluster collaborations that we hadn't figured out a mechanism yet for how to fully make the most of cross-cluster collaborations.
All right, any other reports back from other groups? All right, so we can move into the last breakout session for today. And just because we kind of been sending you into the future and back, I'm just going to share this real quick. Again, so the third session really is how did we move from 2022, where people didn't know what critical zone science is, where it was really hard to collaborate across clusters, where this was not part really of the K-12 curriculum, all these challenges, data issues. How did we move to this amazing time that we're now in 2030, where all of these problems were solved? So the idea is to directly connect these two periods with something that was done, and especially thinking about the Biden administration funding environment might change. Imagine we had a lot of resources. What happened? What was done? So in those discussions, that might be actually the most important part. We should discuss using present tense. And again, please take notes on Jamboard. And we'll have a little bit longer time to share out after the coming back to the main room. So Maddie will send us into breakout groups at just one more time, and then we'll see each other back here in about 7 minutes or so.
Hi, everyone. I think that I'm the prompter for this one. So what did you think needed to change to move us from the present into this future?
I'll speak for our group. One of the things that we shared was that the education and outreach groups got together at the beginning and worked together to create a set of NGSS aligned lessons and activities to be used in classrooms. Yeah, that we all work together across clusters in the E&O side of things.
So important. Yeah, rather than tacking it on at the end, it's co-created through the process.
Mm-hmm. And we're all doing different things, which is fine. It might work better in our communities to do different things, but it'd been nice to know, okay, this group's going to be doing teacher workshops, but these groups are going to do, you know, K through 12, or focus on the high school programs. And then we could have collaborated within our groups that way. Or that's what we did to get to how great it is in 2030 now.
One thing that our group chatted a little bit about was how the emergence of more sort of cross-departmental or interdisciplinary graduate training opportunities, graduate and undergraduate training opportunities that helped train the next generation of CZ scientists to be more interdisciplinary and better communicators.
So important. And that came up in our group as well. So you have people that have spent their whole careers with that view. And then also there needs to be outreach to the funders and the gatekeepers, you know, who are more senior to get everybody on board to allow that to continue.
One of the things we mentioned, going off a little bit of what Kathy said, was talking about how the new group of students coming into college and graduate research in 2030 will have grown up learning about critical zone science in their K through 12 education. So they'll, if we're in 2030, they do have a much better understanding of the relevance of critical zone science and maybe more inspired to go into careers pertaining to it.
Such a great and important point. Yeah, a larger group of people interested in it, aware of those opportunities. It's going to increase the number of people focused on this and the diversity of those people.
One thing we talked about was that our sort of pie in the sky things needed funding. And so one mechanism for that is that CZ Science moves beyond NSF, and that you have programs across federal agencies funding this kind of science. Well, their funding is kind of science, but as CZ Science and building on these sites, et cetera.
So cool. Yeah. And that's really, so yeah, you can imagine with DOE and DOD and USDA across all of these different funding sources who currently super difficult to make that happen. That reminds me of one idea that came up in our group, that the CZ wouldn't just be a directorate of the NSF, but it could be a tool to consider these truly transdisciplinary projects and make sure that they get fair, full consideration. Whereas currently now they can get picked apart by disciplinarians in the different branches.
Yeah, and so it actually kind of came up in our room as well. But one important consideration was just the idea that the agencies all kind of came together and agreed upon common language and terms so that we could identify all of these CZ, funding opportunities or see the connection points there more clearly.
I love this, and my inner reality check is saying that's even less likely than Julia's automatic data checker. Coming together, agreeing on terminology and values. But this is good because it's already happened in this conversation.
All right, well, any last thoughts about how we got from 2022 to 2030? Because if not, then we just want to take a few minutes to kind of wrap up. Thank you so much for engaging in this creative discussion with us. It's always fun to kind of remove ourselves from the restrictions of the present day and think about where we might go. And so it's really exciting to do this activity with you all. As a conclusion, we're going to ask you to all participate in a waterfall chat. So we'll take a moment, a minute or two, and kind of compose a response to this prompt in the chat, and then don't send it until I say chat to press send. This just gives everybody a minute to kind of think and reflect, and then we'll all send our messages at the same time. So the prompt that we would like you to think about is, what important priorities came up that we are not already pursuing? And so just take 1 minute to craft a response to that and put it in the chat. And when I say send, then everybody sends their chat, and we'll be able to kind of read what everybody's thinking. So just take a minute, tell us about what important priorities came up that we're not already pursuing. All right, so you've all hopefully had a minute to think about that. Please send your response and we can all kind of take a look at those as we're leaving the meeting. Take a few minutes to scroll back up.
Yeah, and just a quick thanks to everybody. We're really close at time, so feel free to drop the call as soon as you took a look at the other responses. And also feel free to keep the Jamboard links if there's anything else that you want to add to this. We will certainly use this also to kind of come up with a couple of more ideas and more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So it's
Thanks,
interesting.
everyone.
Bye.
Everybody.